What's up, students? Welcome to the live stream. I'm pretty excited this week. I'm excited every week, but you knew that already. Man, I'm a little sleepy this morning, so, you know, this is where in class I'd be like something along the lines of, if I fall asleep, you know, like throw a piece of paper at me or something like that. But you can't, because we're still virtual, and will be for some time. And well, I mean, we will be for the rest of the semester, and the summer. Fall's looking a little weird right now. We're trying to figure it out. In fact, my wife's in the other room right now on a call with the dean and some of the other campus coordinators, and they're talking about the plans for the fall. If you don't know, the EPCC Board of Trustees a couple weeks ago voted to have a 50-50 split between online and face-to-face classes. Though what a face-to-face class looks like in the fall, we're still trying to figure out, and that's what they're discussing. We know that it's not going to be like completely back to normal, at least right now. I mean, things could change. The governor could come out tomorrow and be like, everybody's back and there's no restrictions, kind of like what he did with restaurants and other stuff last week. So kind of keep your ear to the ground for that, and I'll keep my ear to the ground for that. If I learn more and feel like it's worth sharing, I'll let you know. There's a lot that's going on behind the scenes. It's just a matter of, you know, figuring out, is this actually the direction that we're going to go, or, you know, how are people interpreting this thing or that thing? It's confusing. Do know that there will be some kind of, you can go to a classroom situation in the fall, but what that classroom situation looks like, man, we're talking no more than 10 students, in some cases no more than 15 in others. It's bizarre, so just stay tuned. Let's see, we had a busy week last week, didn't we? Or I guess I did. I spent my weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, attending a virtual conference on apocalypticism in the Middle Ages, and it was awesome, man. I'm still like super energized and stoked from that, from watching other scholars talk my language. You know, it's cool to see stuff like that. But that's not what we're talking about today. We have stuff to talk about, American history, and we need to push forward because we're getting there, man. This week marks the halfway point. So at the end of this week, on Saturday, we are officially halfway through the course in terms of the calendar. Now, that may not mean that you have done all of the work that makes you halfway through the course, but chances are you have. Spring break is next week. We will not be doing a live stream next week. I'm gonna take that time to catch up on some work, namely grading, and do some other things. Yeah, just no time for a live stream. There will be an extra credit opportunity coming your way at the end of the month, and I'll remind everybody about this when we get to that week. But I just want to kind of throw it on your radar for right now. So let me show you something, and this kind of ties into what we were talking about just a second ago. So let me go to my desktop capture. There we go. On March the 25th, which is Thursday, I want to say. Let me look at the calendar just to be sure. Yeah, it's a Thursday. I am giving a presentation that is called The Apocalypse and the New World. And this ties into your course. We barely got to talk about it before we had to move on, but this is from chapter 1. In terms of our timeline, we're going to get a little bit deeper into that, but I'll make sure that I get the link from Professor Wallace and post it up, and if you attend and do just a quick write-up, we can just I'll figure out how I want to apply that extra credit. But yeah, come hear me talk about Christopher Columbus and all kinds of other weird stuff. It's fun stuff, man. Like it's one of those things that you don't really get to talk about in a class like this one, because there's so much other stuff to talk about. But this is an option for you if you want to learn more about some crazy yeah. So all right, let's go ahead and put that away. Go back to the webcam. Do say hi in the chat now that we've got a few more people rolling in. I've got a good handle on my usual 4 or 5 people who show up every week for the live stream. Live anyway. I know a lot of people watch it after the fact, but I always appreciate knowing that you're here. We are going to be diving in more to that post-revolution United States this week. So if you think about the long kind of structure of our class, and maybe I shouldn't have put that PDF away just so quickly. We're reaching what I would consider to be the end of the second chapter of the course. So we have these chapters from the textbook, of course, but there's really kind of 3 or it's 4, let's call them acts to this course. And what I mean by that is, you could call them units too, is that we have these kind of discrete periods in American history, and not discrete as in like secret or hushed, but as like separate, as kind of individual. They can kind of stand on their own. Basically, kind of how I think of it is, if somebody could do a PhD exam field in something, then it could be considered one of these units or something like that. So if we go back to the syllabus for just a second, where am I looking for? And we scroll down here. Let me zoom in on this. And we look at the calendar. So we're right at the halfway point of the semester here in week 8. And we've divided this so far into 2 periods. So we did the colonial period that went right up to week 6. Week 6, 7, and 8 are a discrete unit. This is all about the revolution, and this is all about kind of the immediate aftermath of the revolution, where the United States is trying to figure out just who they are. And next, after we come back from our spring break, what we do next is we look at how the American context grows even more and more and more throughout the next phase. So we look at some big developments. So it's not necessarily about going forward. It's not necessarily about these big kind of sweeping things like the revolution or the colonial period. We start to get into some minutia a little bit. So when we come back, we're going to call this the antebellum period, or the pre-war period, and that war is the Civil War. And we're going to talk about things like the market revolution. We're going to talk about factories and industrialization and urbanization. We're going to talk about the expansion of democracy. And then we're going to talk about people who tried to rein in some of the changes that were going on in the United States and felt a bit adrift by them, before really taking our turn towards the Civil War and looking at how the nation starts to come apart. And then when it does, we've really reached our last unit, which is, of course, the Civil War and Reconstruction, and we're going to take a deep dive into that. So this week, let's think of this as the end of one period and the beginning of the other, and you just have to wait a little bit for the next part of the story. So, where we left off last time is we were talking about the ratification of the Constitution of the United States of America. And the ratification debate, if you'll remember from last week, was a really contentious thing. So it wasn't a guarantee that once the Constitution came out of the Constitutional Convention in 1787, that everybody was just like, oh yeah, I love this Constitution, I can't wait to ratify it. Nah, man, like that's not how it is. Instead, what it's like is, well, actually it sucks, and it doesn't really give us the freedom that we had under the Articles of Confederation. But because there were compromises made, like we talked about, eventually the United States Constitution is ratified and it goes into effect. George Washington is named the first president of the United States, and he serves for 2 terms. And, there's some questions about, why didn't Washington run for a 3rd term? And there's a couple different explanations. We could go with the nice story, okay? The one that, we want to believe it's in keeping with Washington's character, and it sets up an important standard, a tradition really, for the American president, because there's no term limits on American presidents yet. Okay, they aren't there. I mean, typically a president served for 2 terms, that was it, but there was nothing in the Constitution that limited the president to just 2 terms. That comes later. That comes in the 20th century with the 22nd Amendment. And it's because Franklin Delano Roosevelt won 4 consecutive terms. And if you wonder, well, how did FDR Roosevelt do this? Well, okay. Number 1, he's insanely popular. Nobody could beat him. But number 2, we were in the middle of the Great Depression and World War II. Like, yeah, don't want to change horses midstream there. So we have this tradition in American history that dates back to Washington, even before the 22nd Amendment, that, presidents serve 2 terms. Where does this come from? Well, Washington is, he's first appointed president, coming right out of the Constitutional Convention, and then he has to run. And I mean, nobody had a chance. He's like the most popular dude in the early United States. Like, everybody, for the most part, loves George Washington. There's no question about it. He wins, and it's almost unanimous. Like, he wins almost all the electoral votes. Actually, he does win all of the electoral votes. The only time that's ever happened. There are a couple people who came close. Nixon and Reagan came close in 72 and 84 respectively. But they ended up losing like 1 state. Like, Reagan lost Minnesota, I want to say, or was it Massachusetts? I always get these confused. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So Washington is unanimously, by the Electoral College, he's unanimously elected. And he reaches the end of his 2nd term, and he decides that he's not going to run again. And he, if we believe the musical Hamilton, it's because, he had to teach him how to say goodbye, and, the country can move on from leadership. That this is kind of a democratic thing to do. And, you have to remember also that the founding fathers, especially the founding fathers, loved ancient Rome. They loved ancient Rome so much. I mean, look at the architecture of DC, for example, that kind of neoclassical sort of stuff, those columns, whatever. They're in love with Rome. More so than they are with Greece. Okay, Greece plays a significant role, okay, ancient Greece, but it's Rome that really captures the imagination. And there's the story of a guy named Cincinnatus, from where we get our Ohio city name Cincinnati. Cincinnatus was an interesting figure in Roman history. Back in the days of the Roman Republic, before it became an empire, Cincinnatus was kind of a farmer guy, but he also had a pretty sterling reputation for being level-headed. He had a reputation for being a good military commander, etc. And Rome, like it was many times in its history, came under crisis. And in the Republic, the Republic of Rome, there were several different offices to that government. I mean, we could talk consuls and praetors, whatever. But in time of an emergency, a real emergency, the Roman Senate could appoint a dictator to solve the crisis. And the idea is that the dictator would get absolute power to do whatever he needed to do. Didn't need the approval of the Senate, didn't need the approval of the assemblies, nothing like that. Just could do what he needed to do. And then would give back power after the crisis was solved. And we're thinking, we in 21st century America are thinking, how the could anyone trust somebody to do that? How would these men actually willingly lay down power? Because we're not used to that. We're used to this idea of political power being this zero-sum game, and once you get it, you hold on to it. And especially if you're given like that kind of ultimate authority, man, that terrifies Americans like us, right? Like, that's not what we do. Well, it happened that Cincinnatus was appointed dictator in this time of crisis, solves the crisis, and lays down power at the end. He goes back to farming. Washington loved the story of Cincinnatus. And if you read his farewell address, which is part of your assignment for this week, I didn't make you read the whole thing, I don't think. I can't remember. Anyway, it's great. Even if I made you read the whole thing, you'd like it. In any case, Washington loves the story of Cincinnatus, and he kind of hints to that in the farewell address. And he has come up to his 2 terms, and he says, all right, I'm done. I'm laying down power. I want to go back to my quiet life. I'm done with public service. I'm here to advise you with whatever I can do, but I'm done. Now, is this the real reason why Washington lays down power? That's an open question. There were some crises at the end of Washington's second term that left him feeling a bit unpopular, namely the Whiskey Rebellion. I think there were some other things that happen in the wake of Alexander Hamilton's banking plan and some other stuff that doesn't necessarily go over well. Plus, as we're going to find out, Washington didn't really appeal to the more partisan sensibilities of the late 1790s. Well, let's talk about that, because that's really the key here. And what we have to understand is, after Washington, and even during Washington, we have our allies, France. They helped us considerably. Okay, so we just fought our revolution. France helps us out in a big way. And we tell France, essentially, well, when it comes time for you to have your revolution against your monarchy, we'll be there. We'll help you out. Now, the problem is is remember that France and Britain hate each other, like, all the time. Now it's mostly on the soccer field. They've been good allies, geopolitically speaking, but, you know, back in the day, France and Britain hated each other. Hated. And they were always at war. So, to help France out would essentially signal to the British that we're still an enemy. And we just signed a peace deal with them in 1783 to end our Revolutionary War and to gain our independence. Not good. Well, France has its revolution. And ladies and gentlemen, the French Revolution makes ours look like a backyard game of tag. The French Revolution is bloody. It's incredibly terrifying. It's violent. It's so much more radical than our revolution in terms of its spirit. Now, are the consequences of the French Revolution as shattering as the American Revolution? I will leave that up for you to decide. Some would say yes, some would say no. But I can tell you that the principles of the French Revolution, sort of the things that they were fighting against, were much more radical than what was going on in what becomes the United States. So, like us, the French are fighting against the tyranny of monarchy. But the problem for them isn't that they're a faraway colony across the sea that has determined that it can live out its own destiny. No. The French Revolution is about the monarchy not taking care of the people, and then being kind of spurred on by this so-called Enlightenment era philosophy, benevolent monarchs, blah, 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 blah. It comes down to some people whose names you may have heard in the news lately. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. If you saw any of the discourse around Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema's vote on the minimum wage provision in the new COVID relief bill that passed this weekend, there were a lot of comparisons to Marie Antoinette that are historically not well based in fact, but, you know, you do what you want to with that. In any case, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were running. France was in trouble. It had overextended itself. It had started selling off its a lot of its holdings. It was losing a lot of its empire. Yeah, France isn't in good shape, and France back at home wasn't in very good shape either. Lots of people were going hungry. There was incredible income inequality. And meanwhile, the French monarchy was just like throwing the biggest parties that they could possibly throw, spending all kinds of money, and just like, just like living luxury out in the middle of the public eye while people are starving in the streets. And that, combined with some other factors, led to their overthrow. And that's making things very, very simple. And it culminates with this dude named Robespierre and others arresting the French king and queen, marching them to the middle of the town square, and decapitating them by guillotine. Okay, so they execute the French revolutionaries execute the French king and queen in the public square. They cut off their heads. And they take over. And more than that, Robespierre and his allies set up what they call the Terror. They called it this. And they sought out any enemy of the Republic and put them to death. Also in the guillotine in the public square. It got so crazy and out of control that Robespierre himself ends up in the guillotine. Head cut off. And kind of one of the end results of the French Revolution is it has this era of the first French Republic, and things seem to be going well, and then this guy named Napoleon shows up, and well, Napoleon usually gets what he wants, and what he wants is to be the emperor, and he becomes the emperor, and then we're back to a monarchy. And then they overthrow him, and we get the Second Republic, and then Napoleon's like, hey, I'm back. And they're like, yeah, we love you, Napoleon, come back. And they're like, oh, we hate you, Napoleon, you're exiled again. And we have a republic. But then his, grandson or his cousin shows up and says, I'm Napoleon III, and then we get another Napoleon. And then they overthrow it. It's just, France can't make up its mind. In any case, in the United States, there are a couple of factions. One, particularly Thomas Jefferson and his kind of following, who are like, the French Revolution is the greatest thing that has ever happened since our own, and we need to go help them out. And there's another side, let's call it the Alexander Hamilton side, the John Adams side, who are like, so Thomas, you realize that we're the elites, that we're the ones whose head would be in the guillotine if we were in France? And Thomas Jefferson's like, well, that sounds like a problem that you've got. And what we start seeing here is, in this kind of response to the French Revolution, we see political sides starting to take shape. Now, I don't want to call these political parties, because they're not. They're not organized political parties like we think of Democrats and Republicans in 2021. They are political factions, but they are not institutions the same way that Republicans and Democrats are now. So on one side, we have the Federalists. Okay, this is Hamilton, Adams, Washington to some extent. Kind of the guys who were, really strongly advocating for that strong central government back during the ratification debates. On the other side, we have the kind of confusing named Democratic Republicans. Okay, that sounds weird to us because we think of Democrat and Republican as being very different. But back here in the 1790s, they called themselves Democratic Republicans. What they're really... France is kind of the touchstone, and kind of feeling the way through the French Revolution is kind of the touchstone. But what we have is we have two definitions of freedom and liberty that are really fighting each other here. And that's kind of what the textbook talks about. So on the Federalist side, they are very much in the way, kind of cut in the cloth of strong central government, the rule of the elite. And the Democratic Republican side is more, do you remember what we fought a revolution for? We don't want the rule of the elite. This really strong central government really kind of makes us uncomfortable. What we don't want to end up being is we don't want to end up being the British monarchy that we just threw off our shoulders. These are guys like Jefferson and, as it turns out, Madison, even though he was writing the Federalist Papers back during the ratification debate. Some of the anti-federalists kind of come into the Democratic Republican side. Aaron Burr becomes a Democratic Republican because it suited his political interests quite well, which, if you're familiar with Hamilton, then you know that story. But more on Burr in a second. Because Aaron Burr is a fascinating person for a completely different reason than the Hamilton musical. In any case, so we have this kind of strong central government on one side, this kind of let's kind of let the states decide what the states need to do on the other, centralized government, kind of decentralized government. Those are kind of the stakes. And they look at France, and the Democratic Republican side is like, yeah, oh man, France is great. The Federalist side is like, no. And in fact, the Federalist side had been making some pretty interesting deals with England. And now you might be thinking, wait a second, England? Didn't we just fight a war against them? What the hell are we doing? Well, the Federalist faction understood that England was key to our success. Like, despite having our independence, we still needed to have some kind of relationship with them. And there was already one built in. Now we can make some other decisions to go and, legally trade with the French colonies, the Dutch colonies, etc. But we still got to do business with England. We still have to. So we do. And that association with England makes the Democratic Republicans a bit nervous. They're very much more on the side of France. The Federalists are very much kind of more trying to cozy up with England, especially in the wake of the Revolution. And man, like, it sets off some really interesting political fireworks. Now, what's really interesting is that in the wake of all of this starting to happen, Washington takes one look around and goes, we're in trouble. And as he's stepping down, he writes this farewell address, and he gives two pieces of advice to our new nation. And he says, okay, what you need to avoid are two things. You need to avoid getting caught up in foreign entanglements. We don't want to have these really strong foreign attachments, because what happens all the time is that if we get, caught up in these foreign entanglements, then we're going to end up in a war that we don't want to be in. And he also says we need to try to avoid political factionalism. Now, hold on a second. What did I just tell you? I just told you the story about how we're starting to get involved in kind of some foreign entanglements with France and with Britain. And I also told you that those foreign entanglements with France and Britain are leading to the development of political factionalism. So we ignore Washington completely. Isn't this the most American thing that could possibly ever be done? We hear good advice, we reject it categorically, and we in fact do the opposite because we have to learn the hard way. America. It's what we do. Now, with Washington stepped down, there's an election, and the voting public, which again amounts to about 6%, maybe a little bit more of the entire American public, decides to stay the course with the Federalist Party. They elect John Adams. John Adams is a fascinating dude, but a terrible president. Like, the guy couldn't stop stepping in it wherever he went. Adams didn't even have the approval of the entirety of his political faction. Like, Alexander Hamilton spoke out against him. Like, if you're going to run as a Federalist, you need Hamilton. You need him. You also need the rest of that whole Federalist apparatus behind you, because the Democratic Republicans are popular. They're really popular, especially in southern states. But Adams figures it out. He wins. And, well, things are complicated. His, excuse me, his primary opponent in the presidential election is Thomas Jefferson, Democratic Republican. Now, elections worked a little bit differently back in the 1790s. Now, when we vote for federal office, okay, when we vote for the presidency, we're also choosing a vice president to go along with the president. Okay, so when we voted in 2020, the two main political choices in the 2020 presidential election were Donald Trump and Mike Pence versus Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. We were choosing both president and vice president together. Okay? So it wasn't like you could vote for Biden and vote for Pence, or vote for Trump and vote for Harris. It was you're voting for Trump and Pence or Biden and Harris. Rewind back to 1796. The election rules state that the president is going to be the winner of the Electoral College, but the vice president is going to be the runner-up. So this means that we have John Adams, Federalist, as president, and Thomas Jefferson, Democratic Republican, as vice president. That would mean, like, if we took the results of the 2020 election, that would mean today that Joe Biden would be president of the United States and Donald Trump would be vice president of the United States. You can only imagine the dysfunction in the White House if that were the case. It'd be brutal. Well, here we are back in 1796 in the middle of a couple of different crises going on in the United States, and we have at the head of the government two guys from opposing factions. Now, Jefferson doesn't really try. Okay, he totally tries to undermine John Adams. Basically, in terms of foreign policy, Adams is all about Britain, Jefferson's all about France, and this is working at loggerheads because we're trying to also stay neutral, but the diplomacy is just not going very, very well. Now, eventually, Britain and France go to war with each other again. And now we have to make a decision. Hey, we've been trying to float the line. Adams has been talking with Britain. Jefferson's been talking with France. And we have to, the United States, now that Britain and France are at war, if they're really going to stay neutral, they're going to have to not back any of them. But that's not what's going to happen. Adams tries to send some ambassadors to France to kind of, just chill them out, whatever. Partly because France started capturing American ships that were sailing in the waters that were being contested between Britain and France. Okay, we're trying to trade with people. Okay, we're trying to trade with Britain. We're trying to trade with France. They're right across the English Channel from each other. So, American ships start coming in there, and here comes France. We're going to capture those ships. Britain was also doing the same thing. So, we send some ambassadors to France, and they get to France, and they're laughed out of the room. Jefferson sends his own guys too, in addition to Adams sending his dudes. So Adams sends his diplomats in one party. Jefferson sends his diplomats who are loyal to Jefferson also to France. France is just like, you guys are terrible. They embarrass these guys. Absolutely embarrass our ambassadors. And then they publish an account of just how much they embarrassed our guys under an anonymous name called XYZ. And this becomes known as the XYZ Affair. Now, in some eras, this would be almost a declaration of war. But again, we're trying to stay neutral. Now, a lot of dudes, a lot of Congress was really pissed off about this. And they're like, you know what? We're not going to take this. We're not going to take it. And oh, by the way, France had demanded bribes from the United States to leave our guys alone. So our Congress was just like, absolutely go yourself. No. And one guy even says, I will pay $1 million, millions of dollars for defense, but I will not pay France a dime for tribute. And eventually, French ships end up like on our shore, just off our shores. It's very, very clear that we're about to go to war with France just a decade after we fought with them in our own revolution. But thankfully, everything kind of calms down and we don't end up at war. Now, because this happened, because we didn't go to war with France, there were people in the United States, in the government in particular, who were like, oh my God, how could we not go to war with France? They insulted our moms. We gotta go to war. Adams, you're weak. You're weak on France. Probably call him like a soy boy or something like that, you know? We call these dudes war hawks. Okay, they want that war. There are those in Congress now who would do anything to have another war. Right now, the Hawks really, really want to go to war with Iran. They've wanted to go to war with Iran for so long. But in any case, these dudes criticize Adams. Okay, you're weak on France. Why didn't you defend the United States? This is ridiculous. What an absolute waste of a president. So Adams says, oh, you think I'm weak? Well, let me violate your First Amendment. I'm passing the Alien and Sedition Acts, which make it illegal for you to criticize me. It makes it illegal to criticize the government. This is coming from the government. What's the first part of the First Amendment? Oh, right, freedom of speech. The government cannot punish you for speaking out against it. Yet, this is exactly what the Sedition Act is doing. The Alien Act puts strict limits on immigration. It also said we can deport anybody who's criticizing our government. Gone. So, what Adams is really doing here is he's targeting his political opponents. He's targeting the Democratic Republicans. That's what he's up to. Because it's the Democratic Republicans who tend to be the war hawks, who really want this war. Which is bizarre because they were so like into going to France, into France. But now they've insulted our sovereignty, so people got to shoot guns at each other for that. So Adams starts throwing people in jail. And doesn't go well for him. And he's got to run for re-election in 1800. And guess who else wants to run for president in 1800? Thomas Jefferson does. And Thomas Jefferson wins. Thomas Jefferson winning the election of 1800 is a massive change in the direction of the United States. By some historians, it's called the Revolution of 1800. And what Jefferson wants to do is he wants to mold the United States in that democratic Republican image of freedom and liberty, where the Federalists want that strong central government to regulate and to do what it needs to do to advance the cause of the U.S. through the government. Jefferson says, no, we want limited government. We want men to live these lives of freedom and liberty. And, you know, if I had my way, I'm speaking as Jefferson here, I would want all Americans to be small farmers who just created lives for themselves, who lived off the land and didn't need the government for anything. Live in perfect liberty. And the policies that Jefferson pursues mirror that. And Jefferson is a popular guy, man. Just an absolutely popular guy. At least for a while. They all kind of sour up. In any case, I told you I was going to say something about Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr runs with Jefferson. You might remember this from Hamilton. Aaron Burr becomes vice president. Jefferson doesn't really think much of him because Jefferson knows that Aaron Burr kind of waffles and flip-flops for, you know, like this, that, and the third. And meanwhile, like, Alexander Hamilton is just like constantly, you know, berating him because Hamilton doesn't like Aaron Burr at all. So what ends up happening is for a couple different reasons, Aaron Burr gets really, really angry with Alexander Hamilton and challenges him to a duel. You know this story. And the vice president of the United States goes and duels Alexander Hamilton in Weehawken, New Jersey, and shoots him dead. The vice president of the United States kills a man in a duel, and kills not just a man, he kills Alexander Hamilton. Like, imagine today if Kamala Harris goes out to an island with, I don't know, let's say the congresswoman from Georgia that nobody likes, unless you like her, and they shoot at each other, and Kamala Harris kills that person. Like, we would go insane over this. But this is what happened back in the good old 1800s. In any case, Aaron Burr ends up having to go on the run, and he kind of disappears from public life for a little while. But then Aaron Burr leads a conspiracy against the United States to try to overthrow the government and establish a new country. It's bizarre, man. I've got a whole book on it somewhere. It used to be like right next to me, and I guess I put it away or something, but that's something to track down. In any case, it blows my mind that, you know, Aaron, the vice president of the United States, could just like shoot a man just like that, just boom. In any case, what I'm trying to get at here with this kind of big tour of the early republic is that things are really, really messy in the early republic. There's a lot of trying to figure out how we're actually going to do the things that we set out to do in the Constitution, in the during Washington's term, during all that sort of stuff. It's a lot to handle. And what we see is a pattern not of perfect decisions out of every turn. We see a lot of fumbles. maybe the greatest fumble of them all is having to go to war with England again. That's what the War of 1812 is all about. The British Navy were harassing our ships. They were putting our soldiers, or they were impressing our soldiers, which means that they're essentially capturing our soldiers and making our dudes fight for Britain. Okay, impress doesn't mean, like, in this context, doesn't mean like Americans were like super awe-inspired by like British ships. No, the British would capture our dudes, put them on British ships, and then say, you have to fight for us now, or you're in prison or you die. That and a few other things leads to this war in 1812. Britain kicks our ass for a bit. They come here and the revolution is still kind of in the back of their mind, and they're like, you know what? We're gonna take care of business this time. I mean, to the Americans' credit, we end up kind of winning this war. Kind of. We do some things that are important-ish, to say the least. Like, for example, you know, we head up to Canada and we burn York, which is modern day Toronto. But in response, like, the British are like, really? Okay. Here we come for Washington, D.C. And the British actually burn the White House. They take D.C. over. They have us dead to rights, essentially. But we keep fighting. We end up winning in a couple places, in particular at Fort McHenry, just in the port of Baltimore, where this guy named Francis Scott Key writes a song. It starts, "Oh say can you see, by the dawn's early light, oh so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming." You know, our national anthem. Good for him. Apparently the third verse is really not great, and we don't sing it because it's all about killing slaves and whatnot. But anyway, that war ends with a peace treaty after a stalemate, except nobody tells Andrew Jackson, who's down by New Orleans, and nobody told a small band of British soldiers who were down in New Orleans. There ends up being a battle. Andrew Jackson just absolutely routs those dudes, wins the Battle of New Orleans, and thus we say that we won the war. Which is why I'm like, yeah, we kind of won. But by the time the Battle of New Orleans happened, like a ceasefire, I guess, had already been called, and no one was really wanting to fight anymore. Yeah. It did, however, kind of prove once and for all that the United States could handle itself against the British Empire. You know, the revolution wasn't just a one-off. That the U.S. was actually a nation that needed to be, you know, paid attention to, left alone. Nobody wants to mess with us, at least for a little while. We'll have some wars, most of which we start. Okay, like the war in Mexico, for example, that's ours. Then the Civil War is obviously us, and you know, then we kind of chill out for a little bit. But in any case, we've reached that magical time of 11:55, so let me go ahead and stop there. I'll shut up for a minute. If you have any questions or want me to go over something again, throw that in the chat just real quick, and I'll see what I can do. All right, it looks like there aren't any questions for now. That's cool. What we'll do is we'll just go ahead and call it a day here. We have some things that we need to address in the intro video, just stuff that needs to get done this week. And then a reminder that next week there is no stream. It's spring break. Catch up on your stuff. I'm going to catch up on my stuff. And if you get a chance, just take a break. Relax. If you are caught up on work, don't do anything for my class during spring break if you can help it. Okay? Take your time and do stuff that you need to do for yourself. If that means you pick up another shift at work, that sucks, but great. You need the money. If that means that you spend your week playing the video game that you've been wanting to play, but haven't had the time to, make sure you do that. Recharge. Because we had another 8 weeks of this class, and we got to get to the end. And I say that for myself as much as I say it for you. But I'm going to work on my class over the break. Don't worry about it. All right, guys. So I'll stop there. Thanks for coming by. For the few of you who came this week, I can't wait to see you again in 2 weeks where we start talking about the market revolution. I promise it won't be too boring. I know that stuff like that can be a handful sometimes. But until next time, stay safe. If you can get your vaccine. I'm going in an hour to get mine. Give me that arm, man. I want that shot. Shots. Anyway, I'm excited. So, have a great week. Have a great spring break. Stay safe. And I'll see you guys after the break. Take it easy, y'all.